When I first pulled into the neighborhood with my brand new Porsche, I could already feel the eyes on me. The glossy black paint gleamed under the afternoon sun, and the engine's subtle roar as I parked in my driveway was enough to turn heads. For me, it was more than just a car. It was a reward for years of hard work, a symbol of discipline and long nights on the job. But for the HOA, especially for Karen, it was apparently a crime against the aesthetic harmony of the community. Karen wasted no time making her presence known. The very next morning, she marched up my driveway with her clipboard tucked under her arm. Her lips pursed so tightly, I thought they might disappear into her face. She didn't bother with greetings. Instead, she launched straight into a lecture about how my Porsche was too flashy, a disturbance, and not aligned with the community's values. I stood there, coffee in hand, letting her words wash over me like static. Her complaints ranged from the sound of the engine to the distracting shine of the car's exterior. What struck me most wasn't just her disapproval, it was the venom in her tone. She wasn't just annoyed. She was personally offended that my car existed within her line of sight. She threatened fines for noise violations and hinted that she could push for new HOA bylaws to restrict unsuitable vehicles. I had dealt with difficult people before, but this was different. This wasn't about rules or fairness. This was about control. Over the next few days, her harassment escalated. Anonymous complaint letters started showing up in my mailbox, each one demanding that I remove the Porsche or face penalties. A few neighbors even told me Karen had been knocking on doors, stirring up resentment by spreading exaggerated rumors about me, revving the engine at midnight or blocking sidewalks with my car. None of which had ever happened. It was obvious that Karen saw me as a threat to her little empire. What she didn't know was that I wasn't the kind of man to roll over because of empty threats. I had kept quiet so far, letting her vent, but in the back of my mind, I had a feeling she was going to push things further than she should. And as much as I loved my Porsche, I was even more determined not to let someone like Karen dictate what I could or couldn't do in my own home. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about principle. It was late in the evening when I first noticed something strange outside my window. The street was unusually quiet, no kids playing, no neighbors walking their dogs, just silence. I heard faint footsteps on the driveway and peeked through the blinds. That's when I saw them, two men in what looked like police uniforms standing suspiciously close to my Porsche. At first glance, they had the posture of authority. But something about them didn't sit right with me. They didn't arrive in a marked cruiser. Instead, their vehicle was a dark, beat-up SUV parked awkwardly down the street with no sirens, no lights, and no police insignia. One of the men bent over, shining a flashlight across my Porsche's body, while the other fiddled with a clipboard, pretending to take notes. I stepped outside, my instincts kicking in immediately. "Evening, officers," I said, my tone calm but probing. They both stiffened, then quickly composed themselves. The one with the clipboard announced they were there because of multiple complaints from the homeowners association about my car. He claimed the Porsche was illegally parked and subject to removal. I raised an eyebrow. My car was neatly parked in my own driveway, well within property lines. Their uniforms looked off the longer I studied them. The patches on their sleeves didn't match any department I knew, and their badges seemed cheaply made, shiny in a way that screamed imitation. They avoided eye contact, and their body language was nervous, not confident like real officers. As they fumbled through their explanation, I noticed Karen across the street. She was standing half-hidden behind her garden fence, arms crossed, smirk plastered on her face like she had orchestrated the whole thing. The sight of her watching confirmed my suspicion. This wasn't official business. This was a setup. I pressed the officers with a few pointed questions. "Which precinct are you from? Who authorized this tow order? Where's your marked unit?" Each question made them stumble harder. One even muttered something about paperwork being filed later, which no real cop would ever say. By then, my patience was gone. I didn't move a muscle, but I kept my phone close, ready to make a call if this escalated. Karen thought she was clever, sending imposters to intimidate me, maybe even to take my car away. But what she didn't know was that she had just crossed a line she couldn't come back from. And if those men were here to steal, they had picked the wrong driveway. The moment I realized Karen had sent fakes to my driveway, everything inside me shifted from cautious to controlled readiness. Years of training taught me to recognize when something was off, and these guys were practically screaming it without knowing. I kept my tone calm and even, but my eyes studied every detail, cheap stitching on their uniforms. Boots that didn't match regulation, radios clipped to their belts but not powered on. They weren't cops. They were imposters, and their mission was clear: get my Porsche out of my driveway. I decided to play along for a few minutes, to see how far they'd go. "So, you're towing my car tonight?" I asked. The taller one nodded, trying to sound authoritative. "Yes, sir. HOA directive. Just sign here and we'll remove it." He held out a clipboard with paperwork that looked like it had been printed off a home computer. The header didn't even list a department, just some vague Neighborhood Vehicle Compliance Division. That was the final confirmation. I needed. This was a sloppy con job. What Karen didn't know was that my career had prepared me for exactly this kind of situation. I wasn't just a regular homeowner. I was a federal agent. I had seen scams, setups, and attempted frauds more elaborate than this, and I knew exactly how to dismantle them. While they thought they had the upper hand, I discreetly pulled out my phone and sent a coded message to my contacts. Backup would be on the way soon. The men started circling the Porsche, one pulling a pair of keys from his pocket like he already had access. That was the breaking point. I stepped closer, letting my voice drop into that commanding tone I usually reserved for interrogations. "You boys want to tell me who sent you?" They froze, exchanging glances. The taller one stammered something about just doing our job, but his confidence was gone. Within minutes, headlights cut through the street as real police units arrived, along with 2 unmarked government vehicles. The imposters tried to bolt, but it was too late. Officers swarmed, weapons drawn, orders barked. Karen's smug expression across the street twisted into shock as she realized this was no petty neighborhood game anymore. The 2 men were handcuffed on the spot, their disguises useless under the harsh beam of the cruiser's lights. Karen had set the trap, but it was her plan that had just blown up spectacularly. And as I stood there watching the chaos unfold, I couldn't help but think she had absolutely no idea who she was messing with. The flashing red and blue lights painted the entire street as neighbors peeked from behind curtains and cracked doors, whispering among themselves. What was supposed to be another one of Karen's petty power plays had just turned into a full-scale neighborhood spectacle. The fake cops were sitting on the curb now, handcuffed, their faces pale with the realization that their little job had turned into something far bigger. Real officers questioned them while my agency's unmarked vehicles quietly coordinated in the background. This was no longer just a neighborhood issue, it was a federal matter. Karen, however, still tried to bluff her way through it. She stormed across the street, waving her HOA binder like it was some kind of legal shield. "This is a misunderstanding," she shrieked. "They were just enforcing HOA rules. He's the one breaking regulations with that car." Her voice cracked as she tried to point the blame back at me, but no one was buying it. The officers shut her down quickly, reminding her that impersonating law enforcement and conspiring to commit theft weren't rules disputes. As the reality sank in, Karen's bravado melted. When one of the arrested imposters admitted she had hired them, her face drained of color. She sputtered excuses about protecting property values and maintaining order, but the words fell flat. The same neighbors she had bullied for years now stood outside, phones in hand, recording every second of her humiliation. For once, they weren't scared of her. They were relieved. The officers informed her she would be facing charges for conspiracy, aiding and abetting, and attempted grand theft auto. When they placed her in handcuffs, the collective gasp from the neighborhood was almost satisfying. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, was being escorted away like a criminal, her reign of intimidation crumbling in front of everyone. As the police cars pulled out, I glanced at my Porsche. It sat exactly where it belonged, untouched, the gleam of its polished surface reflecting the flashing lights. The car had been the center of her obsession, the spark that lit her reckless plan. But now it stood as a symbol of her downfall. That night, as the street returned to silence, I knew things would never be the same in the neighborhood. People finally saw Karen for what she truly was, and her power over them was gone. She had underestimated me, underestimated who I was, and in doing so, she had destroyed herself. And me? I didn't just keep my Porsche, I kept my peace of mind, knowing that sometimes justice,